Hey, welcome. Hi, Alex.
Yeah, hello, nice to meet you.
You as well. Well, we didn't meet. We're friends.
Yeah, we've met before.
This is a grand reunion after 4 months.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is Canadian Full? Explain what that is. Just talk to me.
Was it? I guess Canadian Full, I'm sure a lot of people out there know it's a type of cigarette that's made by First Nations in the treaty areas, right? Those First Nation reserves. It's, how do I see it? It's very low quality. This isn't a dig on First Nations, mind you. It's just that it's made using very low quality products and unskilled labor, because the whole point is that it's supposed to be cheap. It's supposed to be accessible to
Is it
First
supposed to be
Nations.
like simulating jobs too?
Sort of,
reserves?
in a sense, because only First Nations can make it, sell it, buy it.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is that there's no tax on this, which means it's dirt cheap. Like, I'm talking a whole carton of that is maybe no more than $50,
Yeah.
which is crazy considering that a carton of something like Pall Mall or Canadian Classics is like closer to 130, 50 maybe.
Yeah. No. So how do you get this? Wait, where did you get this? The one that you're holding then?
I'm not supposed to have this actually because it's illegal.
Oh,
but
really?
You talk to a First Nations guy and almost all of them will be happy to sell it to you.
Okay, sure.
You can go into some kind of construction job, any low skill labor, like not welding, well, yes, welding, manual labor,
Yeah,
things
sure.
that First Nations are very prevalent in. You can find these,
Sorry.
yeah, you can find these from First Nations. And, lots of people are willing to sell them for, $5 a pack.
Yeah, that's
which
really
is
interesting.
Yeah.
Because, I was learning today in, the lecture that I had, it was, what's it? I kind of just came to the realization that I was kind of looking at, sociological theory.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I was thinking about it. And I was kind of, ignored the First Nations issue just because I didn't really know how to approach it. Because it's, really kind of unique, I guess. You can't just group it into, other intercultural, relationships. Because, they're actually a different nation within, on paper and, to the greatest extent that you can have it that way in reality,
Exactly.
they are actually a different nation within a land.
It's a bit crass of me to say this, but it's almost like the relationship between Mexico and America in terms of drugs, where cheap drugs are smuggled from one independent territory to another, which facilitates some sort of economic growth within the poorer territory.
Yeah.
Right, which it's really interesting to me how this sort of relationship forms within a country, and not just between two countries like Mexico and USA, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it causes some problems, but if we actually think about it, it's we've dealt with it with some amount of utility. You can't solve this. You can't come to really any new ideas in any conversations that you have. We kind of just
it's just
figuring it out as we go.
Right. It's the thing about this whole illegal sale of First Nations tobacco.
Yeah.
It shines a light on a issue that's not really talked about in terms of First Nations, which is that First Nations, they're given a lot of economic freedom, right? There's not much taxes on them. They have some hunting rights, they can produce tobacco, things like that, with little to no restriction. But they themselves are isolated from the rest of Canada. And the legislation is set up in such a way that they themselves can't really govern themselves.
Yeah.
They're acknowledged as a independent territory, but they themselves are not able to influence the laws of their own territory.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, yeah. No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head.
It's not very talked about because it's sort of hard to understand that these First Nations, they are independent people. We recognize that, but we also treat them as if they were like a colony of sorts.
Yeah, no, because it's really hard when you try to create this divide, and you can argue about the extent to which this divide is warranted, but the fact is that we have this and we do recognize them as their own nation, and they have to
yeah.
like represent their nation within their own
And then
within
their own
a
sphere of
country.
influence.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the biggest problem why people don't actually like identify this issue or just ignore it altogether is because we've just done such a good job at marketing our acceptance of First Nations. If you go to America, you won't hear anybody say things like, "Oh, I am proud that our Indians, our resident Indians, that's what they call First Nations within America, are an independent nation, that we have acknowledged their crimes against them and have made progress to move forward." They don't say that in America because they handled that a couple years back with all the territories.
Yeah.
And how they handled it was that mostly they mostly gave what is it, American Indian territories autonomy, which is to say they can function by themselves, they can govern themselves without input from the American government. But that's not the case with Canada. We preach this notion that we're accepting of First Nations. If you've ever been to school past like 20 when did this start, like 15, 16? Yeah, when we started acknowledging treaty rights in announcements.
Yeah.
Just like publicly in any kind of public speech or things like that.
Yeah, this tokenism.
Yeah, exactly. It's the tokenism that really bothers me here.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really talk about like policy and stuff and like the liturgical aspects like you can, just because like I haven't done any reading or research on that at all.
Right.
But like, yeah, it really just shows that we're not actually like teaching people how to get stuff done. We're kind of saying that like it's okay as long as you say that you're aiming at the right direction for like society to achieve what's good and to like pursue justice or whatever and truth and reconciliation.
Yeah.
Like that just removes the meaning of all of those words.
Right,
Like
exactly.
it removes the meaning of truth. It removes the meaning of reconciliation.
It's a big stage play.
Because it's it's a giant logistical issues that are all under this. Yeah.
It's just that we as a society, Canadian society as a whole, has come to accept that we're pretty, accepting of First Nations, right? We're pretty lenient towards them.
We give them respect because of the past, which I think is one of the more deserved notions of this like historical because it's very easy to see,
but
unlike some other
this respect, it just doesn't have meaning without substance behind it, right? It's like, what is it? It's like after the American Civil War, slaves were technically freed, but they're once they put under scrutiny by the Jim Crow laws and the entire American prison system working to essentially make them slaves legally.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that. It's those situations where people show some kind of camaraderie, some kind of progress. It's in those situations where we need to be more vigilant.
No, exactly. And I mean, it takes up so much time in legislation too. Like it takes up so many resources.
Yeah.
Arguing and talking about this, like this fiending over votes.
Yeah.
This is the definition of identity politics.
Exactly.
Is using a real thing that's observable and just bringing it to this realm of like abstraction in order to like create motion and pressure for your political party. That's like a big problem with like democratic systems, is like how much resources and time and energy is thrown into this like pandering to people's like notions of like rightness and wrongness, because that's what keeps people in like the positions where they have influence and stuff.
I think this concept of political meandering, where you abstract issues into concepts so that you can sort of manipulate
and
voters.
Binaries too.
Exactly,
you create like a hill in the middle where it's really hard to stay on this hill. So people just go into the gutters on either side and just stick with that answer for these nuanced issues.
I feel like this is it's certainly an inherent problem of democracy, but it's also, I feel, a sort of result from, how do I say it? From entrenched political identities.
Yeah.
Because if you observe America or Canada or most other democratic states, there's a couple parties, like one or two, maybe three, but that's extremely rare. One or two parties that are the leading parties.
And to an extent, it's like kind of what we asked for, though, because like when you have a populace who like doesn't have the time or energy, or like convinces themselves that they don't have the time or energy to pursue actual political like utility through their systems that they have, you're only gonna get the options that you get, and so you're kind of stuck with that. Anyway, I'm gonna segue this into like talking about academia because I love university and so far, and like I'm just wondering, Alex, what is academia to you?
That's to me, academia, it's a very complex matter. I'm going to sort of
in your life, just from
this.
like what you've seen, like from what you've seen, not from what you know. Like
my experience with it. So from my personal experience,
as an 18-year-old kid.
As an 18-year-old, that's right, I'm 18, fellas. As an 18-year-old, my experience with academia is that it is helpful and empowering to those who seek academia. It is, how do I say, it really puts into like the saying, God loves those who loves themselves, right? Where essentially you are as good as you make yourself. It really puts that into perspective, because you go into school and you see all these people that are at the top that get praised like throughout the whole school year in competitions, things like that. And you always notice that they are very confident. They are very sure of themselves, outwardly anyway. And they are just more put together than what the rest of the student body looks like.
So, if I'm getting this right, it creates outlets for actual success and excellence. Yeah. No, I'd agree. So right now I'm at a small university with only 700 kids. And like to me, academia, like what it is, it's kind of like a lot of people kind of end up there, and like whether they should or not is a whole nother conversation. But a lot of people end up there and they have to figure out like what they're actually doing and like what they want to do for like the next at least 10 years or so.
Just how their life's going.
Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of talking to my profs about that, and that seemed to be the case. And like, I don't think that it really should be the place. I really think that people should be figuring this out before they spend at least thousands and thousands of dollars to have like
an education,
to have this experiment of like what they are trying to like do. They should be figuring this out beforehand. And I mean, I get how this isn't an option for a lot of people, because the university provides stability. It gives you an identity. You are a student, and that means you're figuring stuff out, and
there's this time gate where if you're too old and you start university, then people won't accept you because you're seen as sort of washed up. You don't have the potential of a 18-year-old.
Exactly. And I think we have two solutions out of this. I think either we fix high school education and actually help kids figure out what is actually going on around them, and not keeping them in like these bubbles of just checking boxes. Or we create opportunities where people can just take that those 3 years in between.
I've actually thought about this a bit during high school and maybe junior high. It's and the solution I came to, right? It's I don't think it's very conventional. I haven't heard many people talk about this one, but
Let me hear it.
Essentially, I think education should be more specialized. It's going to sound draconian when I'm going to say this, but I think apprenticeships should start when you are in junior high school. Not university, not high school, junior high, at the very least. And the reason for that is because identity is a thing you form with experience.
Totally.
And the thing is, high school is a place where you're supposed to find identity, but it's too general in what they teach. They teach science, math.
You're all the same, and you're a number. You're a number type, checking off boxes to get to like the next thing.
You're compared to everyone else in the same exact way.
And it's a huge drop off after grade 12 when you lose that stability. And people clamor for the stability of a university, even though it's not best suited for them, because they're not actually being productive, because they're still trying to figure this out. And they're putting thousands and thousands of dollars into that.
It's just too dehumanizing the way we approach education right now. It's
Yeah,
too
totally.
general. It's too non-specific.
Exactly.
Which is why I think children should be thrust into apprenticeships. This is gonna obviously have its downsides. For example, what if a kid goes into carpentry, decides they want to be a literature major, and vice versa?
Yeah.
Or what if a tutor isn't suited for the job, or what if the child themselves are not suited for that role? There's a lot of implications with my idea.
But I mean, that already happens. Just happens
Yeah.
with people in their 20s, right? So it's like,
exactly.
whatever. What are you really losing by moving that forward? I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
maybe.
it's
But, like,
a bit
I
novel.
like to hear it, but
Mhm.
I think that specialization should be an option.
Yeah.
Way earlier. I'd say around high school probably.
Yeah.
You should be able to start education at a level of university prowess. But the
Mhm.
problem with that is we're so obsessed with
Mhm.
the bureaucratic notion that you need to still keep checking boxes in order to prove that you've earned the knowledge of a course,
Right,
which is
or
totally not.
Right.
You've probably got junior high students who are
Mhm.
reading literature,
Yeah.
who have probably greater understanding than literature university students who are there to check
Yeah.
boxes. So we need to provide outlets for sincere pursuit of knowledge, because right now
Right.
the pursuit of knowledge is bureaucratic.
Yeah.
It's checking boxes, and it's not reaching the actual ends of what we're supposed to do, which is making useful
Right.
citizens.
I actually have a bit different notion, right?
Sure.
It's not an outright. It's like a side grade where instead of providing outlets, we should start categorizing children into potential fields sooner.
Would you
Right.
want to be doing questionnaires, etc., to figure out strengths or whatever? Or
I say practical experience would be better. I say this because I myself grew up with a lot of practical experience in the kitchen as a line cook almost,
Sure.
right? That isn't to say I'm going to grow up as a line cook or I want to be. It's just that it helps give me direction.
yeah, and it proves that you're actually
Right.
useful. It proves that you're capable of producing
Mhm.
something valuable.
And the way, right, exactly. And the only reason this happened was because my parents were invested in me enough to sort of give me that opportunity, right?
Yeah.
But how come we don't move that responsibility to the schools, the education system? How I see it is that the education system should be less of a way to pump out blank slates that are at a competent education level to start university, and more as a way of sort of raising children. I want to reignite this communal
Yeah.
sort of education system
And I mean, that's obviously is incredibly difficult just
No.
with everything.
to scale.
Yeah,
very
it's hard to scale that. But I don't know. So I'd say I'd like to compromise that a little bit, because I think the universities have the potential to be incredibly valuable and incredibly useful, and they are. They're the
Yeah.
amount of valuable scientific research that comes out is still incredibly important, especially as we'll never run out of problems that we need to solve with science. So that's excellent, etc. And I think anyway, I'm not going to tangent off of this, but I'm
Yeah.
going to say in high school,
Yeah.
I think we just need to give people the better support that they need, and better education and awareness of what the institution of college actually is. And we just need to have more, just make it plain to students, hey, after this, your life starts.
Yeah.
And
You think
we have these options for you
Yeah.
to give you an advantage.
Mhm.
Say, okay, we have XYZ workplace, and we have
Yeah.
XYZ, I don't know, maybe something approximating a prep school,
Right,
where
right.
you guide your own learning to an extent and give yourself a great foundation to start uni
Right.
on.
Do you think you're saying that you think high school should be more forwards with how they approach university
Yeah.
prep?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that you should be able to show students their options very explicitly.
Yeah.
And I think you should provide more options, because you should, if you want to actually stay in university and be useful, you should give them options to do lab reports and do
Yeah.
practice labs, prep labs, etc. Or if you want to produce someone maybe in the humanities, writing classes, boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom, actually be a solid writer, so that when you get into university, it will be incredibly easy to be successful. And on top of that success,
Yeah.
you can start maybe a valuable endeavor, like
Right.
maybe starting like either you could go through uni really fast, or you could start like writing something valuable, or like whatever. Like the options are limitless.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, we're just not producing people who are aware that their options are limitless, because they act like in university you
Well-
have so many options.
I wouldn't say that people aren't aware of their options, because some people just aren't suited for certain fields. For example, if you have some kind of mental disorder that makes it hard to concentrate, you're not going to become a science major, but you could be an art major.
Yeah.
Or some kind of business major. And if you're somebody who's very unemotional, that has very little empathy and sympathy, it can be really hard to get into some kind of artistic degree, or even just business. But you can have a future in something more concrete like science, computer science. It's just a matter of filtering out those people.
Yeah.
And giving them a head start earlier on in life.
Yeah. No, sure. I agree with that.
I also think that that we overplay this whole need for an education right off the bat of high school.
Yeah.
It's
totally.
certainly helpful.
And I mean, this is changing. Like, people are becoming more aware that, like, okay, like, I don't have to go right away.
Right.
Like, it just doesn't work like that anyway.
Yeah.
And like that is changing. So that's good. Yeah. Well, I can take kind of what you were going with, and I could like extrapolate it and like go even more extreme. Like,
but that's...
to be honest, like, here, let me say something crazy. I think that half of the arts, the liberal arts, could be lose their place in the university and be like outsourced, like, or open sourced. Because if we make all the like literature in like like literature study, humanities courses, and like most of the things that are abstracted from like political and utility like ends, like sociology, we kind of need it because it really helps us form how to fix problems. And like economics, like we really need that to be rigorous, or else we'll have a lot of problems. But like things like and I think the entire fine arts thing could also be open sourced. And I think that like we can move towards like like a product based industry where the product is like valuable artistic exportation, like because there's just no need at this point in time where everybody has access to the internet. Everybody, at least in Canada, US, like has access to like libraries, and we should make this literature accessible. And because you don't need to stay in the brick and mortar institution to write good literature and to interpret literature well and to appreciate this, because there is no end to these like exploits of literary interpretation. And the problems that we're facing now, and this is like one interpretation of literary postmodernism, where you're getting people writing uber complex pieces on pieces of literature on literature, of paper on paper on paper, just to retain their jobs, because they're not actually producing anything valuable, but they're putting forward the front that they're making something cutting edge just to like have job security. And of course this is not in aggregate in all of the arts departments, but this is like a known issue that is like
hard to approach.
It's really hard to approach, and and it goes beyond just the arts dimension. But I'm just saying that there's no need for like fine arts and literature to remain in the brick and mortar institution. Like just in the internet age that we're in, it's just regressive. Thoughts?
Well, my thought on that is that I don't know enough about art to comment.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I'll say one thing. It's that university lectures on university courses on fine arts and other things like that, it's I'd say gives some sort of standard. Not that the standard is good or anything, or that it's any more useful than the standard you can find just in the public workspace. But it's certainly helpful to those who don't know about it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, like, just focusing on literature here. Because that's a very, like, I guess, probably the most extreme instance of, like, the whole reason that we have studies of literature is because these are valuable works. Like, there's valuable work to study in this like realm of like humanity and art and
Right,
cultural
right.
expression. But the problem is it creates exclusivity that doesn't exist except in the abstraction that we have created, because anybody can read a book as long as they can read.
Right, but then you have these critics that say you have to interpret it in a certain
Exactly.
way to be acceptable in the
Or
circle.
they say everybody's interpretation is equally valid, but ours is nuanced and it deserves this prestige of academia.
Right.
Just because we've stayed here for 10 years and we have this thing called a PhD, but it's actually a meaningless thing at this point in time. And I'm not just trying to discredit work that people do. I do think that people do valuable work through the institutions that we call universities.
Right.
But I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be through this.
I think that goes more into how we value works, literary works in general, and whether or not there should be a rigorous, almost scientific way of analyzing them.
And I'd say probably not, but I think that conversation, or at least the conversation about literary works, should be open source and should have everybody's opinion.
It's just that the academic climate isn't very inducive of constructive commentary unless it is solely made of academics.
Yeah, no, that's
the
fair.
problem with literature. It's very hard to keep it open while also keeping it constructive.
Yeah, and we're dealing with like actually ancient institutions here. Like the film interpretation should be as big as literature interpretation, like the domain. But you see like a class here and there in the universities, at least in comparison to like everything else, right? But like I think that what we see like with YouTube and other like social media platforms, most likely the longer form ones are more constructive and more valuable here. But it is producing valuable work that is just not recognized just because the culture is so ingrained in what our ideals of success and like value are within like these domains.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's like my yammering on, but I do think that like to a great extent we should be separating like sciences and arts, and like I mean we do a little bit, but
not as much as we should.
Yeah, it could be more usefully.
It could be better.
Yeah.
But again, the point I made at the start when I started this was that it sounds draconian, because it is. It's sort of authoritarian in a sense, because you need to control the lives of young people at an early age, when they're most impressionable.
So
that's the ethics part.
Do that. Talk about that more though. Like, are you saying that you're kind of like determining people to like being a useful cog in our machine, and are you saying that's not a bad thing, or?
I'm saying that they move. When you say it that way,
yeah, but like, okay, so say it how you're.
Say it how I want to say it. So how I'd say it is that giving people responsibilities earlier on in life is helpful in finding their identities. It's kind of like if you look at Japanese culture, right? You have these whole lineages of families just doing the same thing over and over again. And it's not a bad thing per se, but it can be restrictive at times. For example, let's say in a Japanese setting, right? Your father is a metal worker, but you want to be an artist. Well, there's very heavy social pressure for you to become a metal worker because you need to honor that lineage, right?
Yes.
And well, I'm not saying that should be implemented wholly. I think we can learn something from that, which is that in most of these cases in Japan where family lineage dictates your job, which of course is it's carried on from the feudal era and is by consequence very authoritarian. This kind of system sort of helps at least provide a backup option.
Yeah, well, okay, I'd like to ask you more about that, but I'd like to make a point, though. You notice the feudal systems and, like, the pros and cons of that, but what we have right now is, it is the Prussian system, and it's a utilitarian ends, because it was used for creating, like, competent militaries, and that was adopted all across Europe, and by consequence in the West as well. It's, like, it actually is checking boxes that trying to make, like, baseline competent people, which has, like, some merit, but it's just like it could be a lot better. And so I'd like to ask you then now, so for this like system that you're proposing, it's kind of unclear to me how we would like siphon people into these like outlets for, let's just say, creative work in the very general sense, like
That's
useful creative work, like like the trades or something like that, like chefs or cooking or welding or framing or whatever.
The thing with that is, of course, a lot of people are going to get the short end, because most jobs that are vital to a society running, like plumbing, garbage disposal, cooking, service-related works, they're very, very labor-intensive, but also poorly paid.
Yeah.
And while I have a hard time imagining a way to change that at the moment, because number one, I'm not an economics major, and number two, I'm not really focusing on that. What I'm trying to focus on is that we should provide younger students, we should sort of coerce younger people.
That's okay. Just keep throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
We should coerce younger people into pursuing careers like more consistently. Instead of allowing the freedom to change, we should just let them decide on one thing and stick with that.
Okay, I think you're touching on an idea here where, like, in the West, we have like the path where you're free, and you have your role models are artists and entrepreneurs and stuff, and like it's super cool, and it's like pursue your own path. And I do think there is something that's neglected there. It's the path of like least resistance, like it's something safe that people want. And it used to be that this path was go to high school, go to university, get a good job. But now that that's falling apart slightly, we need to redefine the path of safety and the path of like, because I do think that like people really want to cling to something like that. A lot of people really would like to.
This is very, very much a people pleaser, in a sense, in that you're giving the people what they want, right? Which is a security.
Yeah, totally.
In this economy, job security is very hard to come by with all these new jobs and inventive fields that are rapid, fast-paced, and also not very inducive of
long-term
employment. Which, to me, is a result of people just not... No, it's not a result of the people, no. But what I'm trying to say is that if you train people at a younger age into specific fields, then you'll have a lot less people later on in life where they'll go, I have so much wasted potential, I should have stuck with this or that.
Sure.
Because you'll create expertise through age, through time. And expertise is created with experience, not knowledge.
So, like what you're saying, I do think that there's a lot of utility in introducing people to, let's just say, skilled labor, or unskilled labor or whatever. Where I fail to connect the dots is okay, first of all, the big logistical hurdle. We're ignoring that for now. We're ignoring that for now.
Ideology, fellas.
Yeah, but so talk to me about... This is kind of a lot to like process.
It's a lot to unpack because it's a whole system. It's not a specific part of an ideology. It's kind of like talking about Marxism without the whole entire thing.
No, I mean, like, we love to do that though, right?
Yeah, like, if we talk about this, it's gonna take the whole day.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But okay, I'd just like to make a few more points about like university. So like since it's so bureaucratic and whatnot, and everybody's just trying to check boxes, that's what leads people out of the path of safety, right? Because then they're there, I checked all the boxes, I did this, why isn't my job coming right away? And they haven't been developing their portfolios, they haven't been developing connections, they haven't been
experience
putting themselves in situations without experience. And like some places are a lot better at this than others. Some people will hold your hand the whole way through and give you a nice portfolio.
Nate with the apprenticeship program.
Yeah, sure. Or like it really just depends university to university.
I think the academic fields are sort of failing in this.
Yeah, no, I do think it's changing a little bit, and I think that's important. Like, it does save a lot of people who were purposeless, and gives them a little bit of like a little pat on the back, like, oh, thanks for paying us thousands and thousands of dollars. at least we won't totally leave you hanging.
Yeah.
Even though that does happen. Like,
I
a
mean,
lot of,
in NATE, it's mandatory for you to have an apprenticeship before you get into
exactly.
the field.
And I mean, a lot of programs do
Yeah.
come with placements and work hours and stuff.
I
which
think
is very good.
that mandatory apprenticeship is much more necessary
Yeah.
in educational fields
Sure.
than we give credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I
Yeah.
think I'm sort of approaching that sort of idea.
Yeah. No, I think.
Right. Where we
think-
should place more emphasis on apprenticeship, more practical experience, than just letting people figure things out.
And I mean, I think we have very different personalities, and I do love. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear. I do love to hear
Mhm.
your thoughts on this.
It's all very.
And I
extreme.
think we do agree on some things that
Yeah.
as keeping the path of safety open
Mhm.
for kids.
Mhm.
But I think where we differ is you kind of want to make it,
Enforce
kind of make it very solid and very ingrained in the
Mhm.
system, whereas I'm trying to kind of preserve the path of safety while
Wow.
also giving kids
Yeah.
options and letting them truly find something that they're suited
Invested
for,
in,
or that
yeah.
they would find meaningful.
Mhm.
But anyway, I'm gonna segue this
Yeah.
yeah, and just talk about what is family to you, and how do you see your parents in your life, and
Oh.
how have they made you who you are?
This,
And we
yeah.
were kind of talking about this earlier, so I'm kind of
Mhm.
going in a specific direction with this, but I just
Yeah,
yeah,
I
please
suppose
articulate that.
the way I see family sort of shapes this ideal of mine where we should have more people sort of be guided along in apprenticeships rather than being left.
Yes.
Because my family, right? My father is a welder, but he doesn't really talk to me about that. He tries to keep me away from the more physical, laborious trades because he understands it's hard. He's worked in the kitchen as a garbage man, as a landscaper, things like that. Just a bunch of physical jobs, and he understands it's taxing, it's hard on his body, and he doesn't want his children to go through that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've always sort of regretted that my dad didn't really give me anything to make myself of.
Sure.
That's of course that's selfish of me to expect my parents to give me purpose in life, but it certainly helps, since every child on earth is not born without purpose. No, let me start. Every child on earth is born without purpose. They're not
Yes.
born to be a leader or
Yes.
a welder or a politician. They're just born, and to give them at least some sort of idea where to go, which is to follow their parents, it makes them, well, it certainly gives them a head start in life compared to those who don't.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
No.
And I've always felt that other people should have this opportunity where if you can't look up to your parents and have them guide you along the way, you should have somebody else who is invested in you, who's interested in your well-being in a career, in a specific
Yes.
field.
Yeah. I think that ties in very accurately with what you were saying.
Yes, a surrogate father. In a,
Yeah.
it's sort of a surrogate parent in an education system.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say I want a daycare for
Yeah.
a school, but yeah,
The
certainly something
option
like that.
should be there,
Mhm.
and I think that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe this has something to do with Asian culture, familial piety, where you follow you follow the patriarch of the family unit because there is an unspoken respect for
Yeah.
them.
So you obviously respect this idea of
Mhm.
having this role model, or whatever, however you want to define that.
Right.
You did it better than me, and you said that you kind of lack that. So what was your experience?
My experience was mostly that I did good in the general academics in my childhood, but that's the thing, it's all general. That didn't really give me a direction.
Yeah.
And that's what I regret about school the most when I was a child, as my upbringing. Because what school gave me was an ability, just the general concept that I am capable at some things.
Yeah.
But
Didn't give you an outlet to really.
it didn't really give me an idea of what
Yeah,
it was.
Sure.
It just told me that I was good at something.
Yeah.
And
You had potential,
Right,
but
right.
not in a. Yeah.
and the way a parent guides their child, the way my father didn't, I feel influences how a child grows. So giving everybody that opportunity is very important to me.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my experience then.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents are very have a very conservative mindset, and I'm saying this very small c conservative.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you should be able to make something of yourself
Mhm.
through like working hard at something.
Yeah.
And I think I resonate with
Mhm.
like what you were saying.
Yeah.
Is that I was also doing like pretty good in school,
Mhm.
but then as soon as like everybody else was like applying to university,
Yeah.
I kind of had this little existential crisis because I was in the exact same
Yeah,
boat.
like,
I just
what
didn't
am
realize
I?
it. It was like I was like, okay, I could do so many things, but I'm such an analytical person that I couldn't figure out what I was wanting to do. So yeah, I had this big crisis, and I had to. So what I did to compensate was I just took in as much information about anything that I was like relatively interested in, and so to get a little bit of an idea of where my passion truly was.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I do think that like this mindset of like you need to make something of yourself, and that you like you have to try and be something, because like to an extent in this society, you need to do that to survive,
Right.
and of course like you don't need to expect greatness to come into your life just because you're working hard at something, but like you should be proud of whatever you create, whether that's just supporting a family or just like just making ends meet. For some people that is like truly an amazing thing, and I think it is an amazing thing. And I don't think we like stress that enough. So I say my solution to this is just bombard kids with like information that, hey, your life is starting and you have the potential to do something great, but it doesn't actually matter. So here are your options. Pick one. And I mean, I think anybody can find happiness in near anything, as long as they're like. And why I'm saying, like, while I'm saying merit in all this, it's like, it's not as if it's a Herculean task. Like, we live in a society so advanced where food is incredibly cheap, even during, like, times of inflation.
Yeah.
Inflation and stuff.
You can always find a way to live.
Housing, housing is a bigger issue, but, like, to an extent, making ends meet has been
never
not
been
that
easier.
hard. So
you would die homeless just 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But now you can live homeless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, but totally. So, like, yeah, I don't know. Just, like, giving people outlets for meaningful work.
Right. So I think our ideologies differ at a core because of how we've been raised.
No, totally. And I think, I probably, but, yes, of course that's right, but I want to dig deeper than that.
Dig deeper,
so,
yes.
Yeah, so I don't know. I am really appreciative of my parents. I think my parents did an amazing job at raising me, because they were very strict until I was about 14 years old, and then they didn't care what I did.
Exactly.
And I think that's a very good balance, actually.
Really?
Yeah, because I gave me the tradition and raising me into like a very relatively useful and disciplined person, and then giving me the opportunity to make me feel every single action that I took, because every single action that I took when there was no consequences was that much more meaningful, because I wasn't doing things out of fear of failure. I was doing things just because they were interesting, or just because they were cool to pursue, like reading books or like doing things like that. And
my parents also did a similar approach where after I got into junior high, they mostly kept their hands off.
Yeah.
But to me, I always felt this silent pressure from them where they expected something. I don't know what it was, because they rarely interacted with me, right?
Sure.
But it was always a silent pressure to me. So I suppose, I guess that's the big difference, where it's on one hand you have freedom without expectation, and on the other hand you have freedom with with the shadow of expectation.
Sure. Yeah.
Sort of, I guess.
And so, how are you grappling with the spot that you have been in, where you kind of have this expectation, but you don't really have a framework to execute something on this? So what are you doing? What steps is Alex Park taking, like, in these months?
I am just copying the steps of those more successful than me, and by me I mean my brother.
Okay, there you go.
Because my brother has always been the recipient of all the expectations. He's supposed to be the capable one who's taking care of everyone. Taking care of all his siblings, because he's the older brother.
How many siblings do you have?
One more, just 3
sure.
in total. But this my brother, of course, he was raised tougher than me, but because he was given more responsibility, he's much more fully formed than me. That's what I think, which is why I basically just copy off of him.
Yeah,
I
no.
have my own strengths. It's just I don't know how to use them, which is why even despite my weaknesses in some areas, I just follow what others have already done.
Yeah.
I mean, in my academic work, this is also reflected because my best works are usually just clever rephrasings of other works.
Sure.
It's very, I guess that's sort of my identity, eh?
Yeah. I mean,
A
like,
clever
your
copy.
identity... let me speak on identity. So I think identity is, one, the things that you do, because that is how you are integrated, is like how people interpret everything that you do, and that's literally everything that could possibly be interpreted by someone else. But I think for yourself, it's the story that you tell about yourself, which is really important, because like the story you tell about yourself determines what you're aiming at, and it determines like how you're going to act. It's like kind of the optimization function if we talk about like computers or whatever. But like you're going to like optimize your actions and what you do in your life to what you think is like going on in this body of yours, right? And so like if you don't think there's any like real relativity, or like you get really nihilistic, it's gonna show in like you're not doing anything because you don't think anything's meaningful. And then of course you can take this and apply it with any other framework in which you contextualize your life. So I think like you need to have a little bit of romanticism. I think you really everybody does. Everybody
I find
does.
plenty of romanticism in the world I see. It's just I don't find purpose in that romanticism.
That's fair. You don't. So talk about that.
Talk about that.
Yeah, like so.
It's,
where do you see it, and why can't you translate that into your own actions? And I'm not saying that your actions are not like meaningful. Like I'm not saying that at all. I think what you're doing is like very responsible.
Well, for example, let's see, the Rutherford Library building. I think it's a very cool design. It's let's say an old antique building that is covered by a new, more modern design. It's literally an old building inside a new building.
Sure.
It's there's a lot of things I think about. Well, it's hard to explain because I'm not the artsy kind, but there's a lot of things that I feel about that. I just don't know how to express it into words. I've never been trained to.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're, if you don't mind me, do you have anything? Yeah. So, I think I'm a very analytical person, but I also hold my, like, appreciation of beauty as, like, one of the defining patterns in my life. So, we can get actually very analytical with this. Like, so what you see something beautiful, let's just say.
I guess I see beauty in a very instinctive way.
Sure. Like you're...
Right.
Yeah.
I've been I've been doing labor for most of my childhood, which means that I use less analysis and perception to define what I think, and more instinct and practice, and maybe even a bit of logic.
So here's how I would define or like map out what you're experiencing. So when you have like beautiful things, like, and this is literally anything. It could be a stapler that's just like painted all black and you appreciate that, or like buildings or actual art places, or like animals, anything like that. The beauty comes in the thing in itself, because we interpret things aesthetically and we interpret things through a sense of meaning and utility. So we can look at an apple and we can look at it as something that we have to eat, and like when it's in our peripheral vision, we look at it as something not important because it's not like life-threatening and such. And so that's our utilitarian interpretation of things that we see, and the same can be applied to touch and hear and whatever. But when you really look at an apple and appreciate like the red tones and like just like the natural shape of it, it is a beautiful thing. Like there's inherent beauty in everything, and it's not like not everything is equally beautiful, of course, but
you can always find beauty.
Yeah, and so I think that's how I try to live my life, is just trying to find the beauty in things. And it can get really amazing, and it can get really intricate when you have very complex things like a book, a novel, something like that.
I think that's why I like mythology so much, because it's it has beauty, but it's very explicit about it. If you've ever read the Odyssey, you read the descriptions about the men, and they're
Yeah.
always oiled up. Every single time a character is introduced, they talk about how they're tanned and how their togas are like draped over their shoulders. Now they're oiled up from head to toe, and it leaves very little to the imagination.
Sure.
It
Yeah,
puts
no.
into words things I can't.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think we're confusing a little bit of things, like, and this is my fault. I think our definition of
Oh.
romanticism.
Yeah.
So by romanticism earlier, I meant like, telling a story about yourself that may not be completely according to the world,
Oh.
but a story that is useful enough to help you to get yourself to do things.
I-
But like
right.
that's kind of a tangent from what we're talking about right
Yeah.
now, and I think we're just talking about like aesthetic greatness.
Aesthetic, yeah.
And I think the word romanticism has been used to describe that, so that
because
is a confusion there, but
my definition of romanticism, as I understood it, was that it is a love for not novel things, love for the unexplainable.
yeah, and I mean it is the same word like that we're talking about, because it's like it ignores just like rudimentary utilitarian things that keep you alive.
But it's
Yeah.
the fact that it's so abstract means our definitions can greatly differ.
Yeah, and that's like a big literary criticism and whatever. But I think that's a conversation for another day.
It's it's too big of a thing for 20 minutes
Yeah.
or something like that.
So, any closing thoughts on your family or
Any
school?
closing thoughts on anything we talked about?
Yeah.
So I guess one thing that I want to say before we close this all off, is that that people should be more romantic. They should be able to see things and find purpose in it, and not just live things because they find it good or they find it pleasant. But I want people to live a life, even if it's hard, because they see some sort of romanticism in it, whether it's through pride or some kind of gratification, justification for their, for how they turned out.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever it is, I just want everybody out there to be able to live like that.
Yeah, I respect that. I think that's very, I think that can be very useful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I
But
think,
that's how I think about it.
Yeah, no, that's good.
That's not going to apply to everyone else.
yeah, for sure. But I think there's a lot of people like you and like me, around the world.
But also
but
too
yeah.
many people different.
That's true. But like that's the beauty of it. If we were all the same, this would be pretty
If
boring.
I had my way, I would. If I had my way,
If
right?
everybody on Earth was me, the Earth would be great.
I wouldn't think that. If everyone was me, I think the Earth would be better off gone.
Oh wow.
I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you gonna go into that?
No, I won't.
That's fair. We'll leave it at that.
I would much rather this world be just perfect.
Yeah.
Sure. But that can be interpreted in many
Yeah.
dystopian
Whatever. We get where you're coming from. The last
just
hour has contextualized that statement. So
Yeah.
that it's a lot more meaningful than if it was just in a vacuum.
Right.
Yeah. No. And I think what I have to say to close is just like appreciate the things around you.
Yeah.
And also just like the world is kind of failing you at trying to like give you this safe path and trying to figure things out. So I'd say just like jump in head first and just read a bunch of stuff and just think deeply about your life and just
Right.
think
Apply yourself.
where am I going, and is it the best, is it what I want, is it what I actually want? So I'm gonna leave it with that.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, thank you, Alex Spark, and see you later.
Yeah, well, it's good talking to you.
Of course.